Debt to GDP in the US is almost 130%. Global debt to GDP is well over 300%. So that is the amount of debt they have versus the amount of growth they're producing to pay that back. Paying it back is not an option. Defaulting is not an option. So anyone listening, what's the only thing they can do? Devalue the thing they owe, print money, debase the currency. What's the scarcest thing in human history? What's the best performing asset in the last 15 years? What is the best expression of currency debasement? What's a put option on the existing financial system? What is long volatility? How do you monetize this chaos? You buy Bitcoin. You buy Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin in the next year, 12 to 18 months or so, 6 to 18 months or so, is going to go to the price range of $250,000 to $1 million per coin. I wholeheartedly believe that for all of the macro reasons that we were talking about.
In the next year, just repeat that, in the next year by end of 2025, where do you see Bitcoin?
Between $250,000 and $1 million. And I know that range is big, but it's just highly predicated on the amount of liquidity. I actually start to lean more towards the $1 million side. I think we see it north of $500,000. I think it ends the year around 100,000. And then I think it really goes off to the races because the US is going to create a massive asset bubble because they have to, and inject so much dollar liquidity into the system because they have no other choice. I think Bitcoin is the only, as I said, only smoke alarm left. It's the only escape valve left. It's the only truly 24/7 global free market. Over the last decade, Bitcoin's annual average return is 63% year over year. It is not only the best performing asset over the last decade and the last 15 years, it's the best performing by far. It's not even close. And so what do you want to do? You want to back your deficits and back your future promises with that thing. You get to just buy that growth off the shelf.
Jack Mallers begins by painting a stark picture of the current financial reality. The US government is trapped between a rock and a hard place with its staggering debt levels. With a debt-to-GDP ratio of nearly 130% and global debt levels exceeding 300% of GDP, the notion of repaying this debt is unrealistic. Defaulting, on the other hand, is also not an option for the US government. This leaves them with a third option, debasing the currency through excessive money printing. Mallers is bullish on Bitcoin's future, predicting that it could reach between $250,000 and $1 million per coin within the next 12 to 18 months. He believes this price appreciation will be driven by the US government's need to create a massive asset bubble through increased dollar liquidity. In an election year, with most of the wealth held by the boomer generation invested in stocks, the government will be motivated to ensure the stock market, and by extension, Bitcoin continues to rise. Please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. You can also check out our other videos on cryptocurrencies and the overall digital asset space and drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks and enjoy the video.
The US government has a third option, which is printing currency, debasing the currency, and that's their only way out. So the US government cannot default. That is not an option, right? And they also can't pay it back. Debt to GDP in the US is almost 130%. Global debt to GDP is well over 300%. So that is the amount of debt they have versus the amount of growth they're producing to pay that back. Paying it back is not an option. Defaulting is not an option. So anyone listening, what's the only thing they can do? Devalue the thing they owe, print money, debase the currency. What's the scarcest thing in human history? What's the best performing asset in the last 15 years? What is the best expression of currency debasement? What's a put option on the existing financial system? What is long volatility? How do you monetize this chaos? You buy Bitcoin. You buy Bitcoin. That's been my macro thesis from day one, and that's my Taylor Swift analogy. Bam, clip it. Yeah, well, like I said, I just think that the Treasury is going to find a way to increase dollar liquidity. That liquidity is going to realize itself in the S&P 500, in Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin ends the year at around or above $100,000 per coin. And I think the S&P keeps chugging along, especially in an election year. Like, where is all the wealth? all the wealth is with the boomers and that age class. They all have a big stock portfolio. And again, if you look at how the US actually finances its interest payments and pays down a lot of this debt, it's through asset bubbles. No, I think that, well, potentially, in the short term, potentially, right? We saw Bitcoin come all the way down and trade in the 40,000s for a second before rebounding right back. I think Bitcoin is the only, as I said, only smoke alarm left. It's the only escape valve left. It's the only truly 24/7 global free market. And so what Bitcoin does phenomenally, better than anything else in the world, is tell you the liquidity situation. As soon as Japan tried to hike rates, Bitcoin ran down, and that was a scream to there's not enough liquidity to support assets. And then as soon as Japan came out and said, oops, that was a mistake, we'll never do that again, then Bitcoin rebounded. And so I think what you'll see in assets more broadly, but Bitcoin specifically, is there liquidity? Is there debasement coming to the currency? Are they injecting more dollars into the system? And so my expectation is they will. And so I think Bitcoin will outperform and Bitcoin will be a leader, but of course the S&P 500 will follow, no doubt. I think Bitcoin in the next year, 12 to 18 months or so, 6 to 18 months or so, is going to go to the price range of $250,000 to $1 million per coin. I wholeheartedly believe that for all of the macro reasons that we were talking about.
In the next year, just repeat that, in the next year by end of 2025, where do you see Bitcoin?
Between $250,000 and $1 million. And I know that range is big, but it's just highly predicated on the amount of liquidity. I actually start to lean more towards the $1 million side. I think we see it north of $500,000. I think it ends the year around 100,000. And then I think it really goes off to the races because the US is going to create a massive asset bubble because they have to, and inject so much dollar liquidity into the system because they have no other choice. And I think Bitcoin's the best performer there, like it always is, and runs way, way, way to the upside. Inevitably, like printing money isn't real growth. We know that on this show. So there's going to be a hangover. It's like drinking alcohol. You drink alcohol, you think every girl loves you, you think every song's the best, you think your dance moves are the best in the room, and then you have to wake up in the morning and realize how embarrassing you were. And so eventually there'll be a market correction, but I plan on holding all the way through like I always have. Bitcoin's price goes up. I mean, listen, the reason Bitcoin's so performant is because it's fixed supply. It's the only fixed supply asset in the history of our species. Gold is scarce, gold's not fixed. If we need to find more gold, we can. If you want more Bitcoin, you can't. And so I think everything bleeds from that core conceptual idea. And so the whole point of a decentralized currency or distributed ledger technology, the whole idea is distributing the monetary policy, making the monetary policy resilient from any central control or change. And so it's natural that every individual will want Bitcoin, every corporation will want Bitcoin, every government will want Bitcoin. Finding the hardest money, monies compete over their monetary policy. The harder monetary policy wins. You see this. Look up a Nigerian Naira chart priced in US dollars. Which currency wins over time? The harder one. That's the dollar. So now look up a US dollar chart priced in Bitcoins. They look the same. All that's happening is a more dominant, harder monetary policy is competing and beating weaker monetary policy and currencies. And so I think the US government, no matter who's elected, will find themselves owning Bitcoin because it's natural to own the harder money always. Look at the history of gold. Gold at one point was the harder money, and that's why so many people, including central banks, own it. And I think it's natural that governments start owning Bitcoin. You're seeing the adoption in the individual level, at the corporate level with companies like Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy, and I think you'll see it at the nation state level. It's just only natural.
Mahler stresses that Bitcoin's importance transcends political boundaries. It's not about which party is in power. The underlying economic realities remain the same. The US is on an unsustainable fiscal path, and the only viable solution is currency debasement. In this context, Bitcoin becomes a lifeboat in a sea of uncertainty. He points out that regardless of whether Donald Trump or another candidate is in office, Bitcoin's value proposition remains unchanged. The dollar's hegemony is under threat, and a sovereign debt crisis looms large. The only way to navigate this landscape is by holding an asset that is immune to these systemic risks, Bitcoin.
I think even if the Democrats win, it should happen. Why should it happen? We need to address the fiscal deficits. Like, what are we talking about? The debt is untenable. In the beginning of our conversation, we're talking about just like, no matter what, the US is in trouble. You want to raise rates, you want to lower rates, you want to work with Japan this way or that way. Right now, the policy is, please, nobody sell your treasuries. We can't afford it. Everyone hold on tight. We have to figure out how to land this plane. And a sign of confidence is backing a lot of your deficits, your debt, with something hard and something real. And we talk about things like global debt to GDP or even domestic debt to GDP here in America. That deficit that ratio is bad. 120, 130% debt to GDP, not good. 350% global debt to GDP, very bad. You need to find more growth. You need to find more real hard assets. And so by building a Bitcoin strategic reserve, listen, over the last decade, Bitcoin's annual average return is 63% year over year. It is not only the best performing asset over the last decade and the last 15 years, it's the best performing by far. It's not even close. And so what do you want to do? You want to back your deficits and back your future promises with that thing. You get to just buy that growth off the shelf. And so the only thing that's outgrowing the amount of money our government is spending is Bitcoin. How do you solve the deficit problem? You own something that's growing faster than the White House can spend. That's Bitcoin. And so I think no matter who's in office, it's not like a partisan issue. It's just a great idea. It's just a fundamentally good idea that should give confidence to the world of, okay, someone in that country is doing math, someone in that country understands the gravity of the problem, and someone in that country is working on it. I think that's the only message we want to send, not only to Americans, but to the world. And it's just math. I think Bitcoin, I love the Arthur Hayes quote, Bitcoin equals technology plus fiat liquidity. At the end of the day, it's superior monetary technology, and its performance is a direct reflection of fiat liquidity or currency debasement. It doesn't matter who's in office. It doesn't matter which party or which side, left, right, blue, red, up, down, doesn't matter. The only way out is through. The only way out is currency debasement. And I think Bitcoin goes up no matter what. I will say, as an entrepreneur, born, raised, and currently operating in the United States of America, I love the things Donald Trump is saying for my business. I would love if the United States of America was progressive for Bitcoin, was inviting to entrepreneurship, innovation here, if the Bitcoin Act proposed by Senator Lummis was passed and we started building a strategic reserve here in the United States. Don't get me wrong, I would love that. And I would love if Donald Trump was also influencing Harris to actually pick up a lot of the same policies. And I think it's unbelievable, almost to the sense of the definition, hard to believe that a white paper that was leaked to a mailing list 15 years ago is now at the center of one of the most important presidential elections in United States history. That's unbelievable. I love what Trump is saying, but am I bearish or bullish depending on what politician is in the White House? Of course not. I'm bearish the current financial system. I think the dollar and its hegemony and this coming sovereign debt crisis, all of it's untenable. And that's going to be reflected best in Bitcoin, in the BTC USD price, no matter who's in office.
Mahlers concludes with a reflection on the remarkable journey of Bitcoin from a white paper published 15 years ago to a central topic in one of the most critical presidential elections. He expresses a desire for the US to adopt a progressive stance on Bitcoin, advocating for policies that support Bitcoin innovation and the establishment of a strategic reserve. However, he remains clear-eyed about the future, whether or not the US government adopts Bitcoin-friendly policies. The cryptocurrency's ascent is inevitable. Bitcoin's performance is tied to the structural flaws in the global financial system. And as these flaws become more apparent, Bitcoin's value will only increase. Please like and subscribe my channel.